There is the fact that when you are face to face with someone, you feel more connected. I've actually found it actually much easier. So I deal with sort of high profile, high net worth, high conflict cases. And for me, the separation in the screens has been really helpful, because one person hasn't necessarily been intimidated in the same way they would have done had they even known that they were in the building. I mean, we have such high conflict cases. We sometimes in person will have security with us. We have people moved into by different entrances into the building. So this has been rather helpful. But sort of segueing on from what Mike had said yesterday, it really is about getting levels of comfort. And because of the ability to schedule people for shorter spaces and get lawyers in for even an hour, I would say that I've gone from 1 pre-meeting to sometimes 6. And I will have sometimes 13 people in a mediation, even though only 2 people are getting divorces. I have accountants, financial planners, divorce coaches. So we have a lot of people on the Zoom. And what has been easier for me is I can read faces all at the same time. Whereas when I'm in a room, I'm looking at one and then turning and looking at the other. So this has been easier for me. Also, when it's got really high conflict, I can obviously turn off cameras. I've been able to silent people. I move people quickly into breakout rooms. And we also use technology of Zoom in terms of we have disabled anyone who comes into mediation with us. We've disabled any ability to record on any of the electronic devices that you can do from the head office with Zoom. You can also disable any of the apps that you have, providing you're the host. So I disable all the chat apps, so no one can chat. And the reason for that is experience. I didn't turn off the chat app, and one lawyer thought they were just writing to me. It was coming up on the screen and it went to everyone, and it was something not very favorable about the other lawyer. So beginning of the mediation, I check always with lay people to confirm that they don't have Nest, Echo Dot, any of the recording devices that automatically are in most people's home. So most people don't know that their smoke alarm will typically have some Nest part inbuilt in it. And they confirm this. They also sign off on various protocols that are unique to Zoom, such as no recording and so forth. I always make myself the host. No one else ever can be the other host. I don't co-mediate. So I'm the only person who can go into each of the individual rooms. I'm the only person who can bring someone in. A lot of my cases are so toxic that I can't bring people through the joint main room. I have to take one, imagine physically taking someone into one main room and then taking them to a breakout room. So I do that simply electronically. Does that help, Bob? Shall I shut up now?
No. Well, let's let somebody else, let's hear from Mike a little bit, and we may get back to you, girl.
Whatever works.
Okay.
So I was not as proactive with the conversion as Beverly. I had mediations, gabs of mediations. The initial reaction people had, well, let's just postpone it and let's do it in a month. And that gave me the time actually to get up to speed on Zoom and to get the equipment I needed. I have a desktop rather than a laptop, and so I had to get a separate camera and this silly set of headphones to be able to use. And in the time that I had, I quickly figured out I needed somebody who knew a lot more about this than I did. And I have a guy I call my tech guru, who he and I worked out a pre-mediation meeting, a kind of standard tech check, and sold it to people on the idea that, first of all, I'm not going to charge you for it. And secondly, on the notion that we don't want to spend the first half hour of the mediation getting everybody online together. Let's have it set up ahead of time. And for the first few months, everybody loved that. And it was a terrific arrangement, because I've already by this time had my conference with the attorney, which usually goes on for a good while, and it gets into not so much the merits issues of the dispute, but really the negotiating point, what the negotiating history, where's the leverage, what do you think the obstacles are? How do you want to use mediation here? How can you make sure I don't step on your toes? Those kinds of things. But I did not have the direct client contact. And when we would set up these Zoom tech checks, which we still do some of the time, it was terrific because the client, first of all, the clients are on. And secondly, you're having an opportunity to have a conversation with the clients. And thirdly, you're not talking about the case at all. There's nothing to do with the case. You're just getting to know someone and developing a comfort level with them, which I think Jonah has something, he's got some really terrific points. One of which is when you're on Zoom, don't forget that you're interacting with a human being the way you would be if you were in person. And so the things that would come naturally in that setting maybe don't come quite so naturally to you when you're on Zoom, and you have to be intentional about them, such as just small talk. What's that I see over the mantelpiece in your living room there? That's a really interesting photograph. Where did that come from? So you have an opportunity to really get connected with the parties themselves prior to the mediation. It is totally no pressure. It elevates my credibility because part of the presentation I'm doing, the part that really has to do with how are we going to handle things like what if the internet crashes? How are we going to go on? And part of it is him sort of walking through all the tech controls and explaining to people how they work and answering questions. And be aware, by the way, if you're going to hold a session like this yourself, that the controls look different if you're on an iPad versus an iPhone versus a desktop or a laptop. Anyway, I found that to be a very helpful technique. I also added some things to my mediation agreement and realized that whereas normally my practice had always been everybody who's in the room signs on mediation day in the presence of everybody else, seemed to me a very good evidentiary tool that would establish without any doubt that the agreement had been signed and signed by everyone. Of course, I've never had a dispute over anything like that in all the years I've been mediating since, so it wasn't really that important, I suppose. But now we have to get it done ahead of time. And I'm intrigued. I know Beverly uses DocuSign to do that and finds it to be very helpful. And it's one more thing for me to keep track of pre-mediation that I think she's found a way to get sort of out from under having to ride herd on it and make sure it all happens. But one of the things that went in my mediation agreement is nobody's in the room with you who isn't known. I know there are mediators who literally say, everyone take your camera and scan it all the way around the room and show everybody else that you're not doing that. I'm a little concerned about the distrust that a step like that takes. But I do want a confirmation, certainly in the written agreement, that there's not going to be some silent participant that nobody knows about sitting on the other side of somebody's laptop. Second thing is, I want to make sure that since we are on, typically most people are doing this with laptop computers, that everybody's using secure Wi-Fi and not just sort of the open source. And obviously, that'll prompt you if you find out if somebody's going to be participating or plans to participate in the mediation by going down to Starbucks. You'll know about that and be able to head it off. I think those are important things to have. And then, as Beverly mentioned, no recording. And Beverly actually made the point yesterday. These devices, you do a little research on it. Amazon Alexa can be recording at any time, and you don't have any control over it. And so I ask people, unplug it. Just unplug it. And when it's over, you can plug it back in. And those are some steps the kind of formalized steps in sort of what is written down, and we have it out on the table in front of everyone. That's not all the preparation you need to do, but those I think are important steps to formalize, sort of as a risk management tool for you as the mediator.
Jonah, anything to add on that score? I think you probably do.
Sure. The only thing I'll add, which really doesn't add, but just emphasizes a point here, is that it was my practice pre-COVID in mediations to, when I would set the schedule and I would set a date for getting the briefs from the parties, the mediation statements, I would then tell the parties that I'm going to set a date to talk to you before the mediation, but after I've had a chance to read the mediation briefs. Those conversations were always just with the lawyers. It was just too difficult to try to schedule something where there was a call with the client and the lawyer, and it just seemed to be, not workable. And not all the time, but sometimes now I'm able to have those pre-mediation calls, have the lawyer and the client on a Zoom session. And just in terms of getting to know people and comfort level, that's a big boost, because now the lawyer not only gets comfortable with you, but the client gets comfortable as well. That is even not related to necessarily doing technical things relating to Zoom. I always have a lot of questions before I go into the mediation, to a commercial mediation, to learn more about the case. So now I get to, more often than not, talk about the lawyer and the client. That's all I have to add.
Well, let me say one thing about that. My practice, which I learned from one of my former colleagues, was always to try to meet with the party and their lawyer separately, each party and lawyer separately, before the mediation conference. And I have found that even more essential with Zoom. It is, I will, if there's anything significant at stake, and I leave aside the pro bono mediations I do in Joliet because that's sui generis, but for any other kind of mediation, I will not proceed without scheduling a meeting, if it's through Zoom online, with the client and lawyer. It's to get acquainted, it's so they can get comfortable with me and I can get comfortable with them, obviously, but so the former is much more important than the latter. And I get a sense of who they are and what their interests are. I think that's absolutely essential. And I will just to editorialize briefly. My experience with Zoom mediation has been much, much more successful than I ever would have imagined. I always thought that would be a step down from live mediation to Zoom. And I haven't found that. I have found it virtually as successful for other reasons. One is other advantages that I've found from online mediation. It's easier to get people there. You can get decision makers who don't want to travel to participate. They'll come online and stay for the duration, whereas to get them to come into Chicago or wherever we are sitting can be impossible. And you might get the insurance company to show up, which I think I don't do a lot of insurance company cases because I don't really do any tort work. But there are cases where insurance companies are involved, employment cases or other kinds of cases. And yes, you can get that person there, which you could never do if it was a in-person mediation, because they're usually out of town. All right, Beverly, you wanted to add something.
Yes, I think I forgot to mention a rather important point. Obviously, I'm dealing with people who are getting divorced. Sometimes it's very high conflict and they're in the same home and you've got children who are online learning. The challenges that parents have had to deal with, and then in addition with the pandemic and having to be a teacher to your children, that you have to work out. I work out with them in advance. Where are they going to be located? I will not have both those parents in the house, and I will inevitably get the children being looked after by someone else. So I will either get them set up in offices. I will ask them to move for the grandparents to come and get the kids. We've also sent people white noise boxes from Amazon. We've sent them blue glasses. we've sent them various Zoom things. I do want to share with at the end a few of my products that I have bought from Amazon that have helped me during the mediation. But so I do. Sorry, I don't take commission. I don't take commission, but they've been so helpful. I'm not going to keep it to myself. But I feel that having that talk, a lot of people haven't planned that out. They've planned out what they want. They've planned out their parenting agreement. A lot of my clients have 2, 3, 4 houses. So they'll probably one might decide to go to, I do a lot from California or Bermuda or tax havens, Wyoming. And they will say, okay, for that mediation, we're going to fly to that house, but not having one parent in the house with the children. We also have a thing that if Amazon or a dog starts barking, Amazon arrives, or whatever happens, we establish a protocol with everyone that I am going to automatically, it happens really quickly, I will turn off everyone's cameras and silence them. And then I give them my cell number, which is how because I've disabled the chat button, that's how they get hold of me, okay? Don't forget to turn the ringer off, because you can read someone's face. When they watch you, they hear the ping, they watch your eyes, they see it go down, and they'll be looking at the reaction of the other person. They'll know that other person has contacted you.
One other thing I wanted to mention is one of the things, another security piece is I put in the mediation agreement that each party will be in a room with the door closed, where the sounds cannot be heard outside that room, and the only other people who are included in that room are people who are otherwise invited to participate in the mediation. So, sometimes it's partners, they might be on the same side of a deal, and they might be in the same room, but otherwise, nothing to be heard out by anybody else or outside that room. I think it's very easy for people to ignore that or to leave the door open. So that's something I insist on in my mediation agreement.
Bob,
Okay. Go ahead, Mike.
I had one thing. I just want to bring this up. I don't want to belabor it, but I want people to keep in mind, especially listening to what Beverly just said and thinking about mediations I do or that you do, where in-house counsel is located, in Missouri, and we're here in Chicago, and maybe attorneys are in different locations as well. Your mediation agreement has a provision in it, I hope, that talks about confidentiality, and you talk about confidentiality in presenting the mediation. Kind of need to give people a heads up that the legal status of that can become questionable, because, and there are actually some cases out there in the federal system where the parties had literally agreed, we're going to apply the law of XYZ state, which is where we're doing the mediation. And the court, which was in a different state, decided they wouldn't apply that standard of confidentiality. They'd apply the judge's state's law, which was different. So insofar as you're assuring people about confidentiality, it's wise to make sure you give them a footnote that says, just so we're clear, laws are somewhat different in different jurisdictions on confidentiality and the scope of it. And legally speaking, given that we're in different locations, we're going to maintain confidentiality as best we can, but I can't give you the promise that that's necessarily, if push comes to shove, going to be legally enforceable. Or at least have a chat with the lawyers about that before the mediation, call their attention to it, because it's a gaping hole, frankly, in confidentiality.
And that's true, Mike, whether it's in person or on Zoom, correct?
Well, on Zoom, it's obviously, people are physically located in different jurisdictions. At least in person, everybody's physically located in the same place.
Yeah.
But you can have the same problem come up if, and this happens in my area, you have a wonderful statute on confidentiality and privilege in Illinois under the Uniform Mediation Act. But if you are if the underlying claim is based on federal law, and the case is in federal court. The federal court doesn't follow the state privilege law. Federal court follows the federal standards, which, to the extent it's clear what they are, they're not nearly as generous in protecting confidentiality. They're much more built around the Rule 408 offers of compromise rule of evidence standard, which has a huge exception in it. So there are other places where that's the case too. And there was an article that a colleague of ours in California, Jeff Kitchaven, wrote with Teresa Frisbee, I think, this past summer on Law 360 that kind of highlighted this, and people ought to be aware of it. But especially if you have people physically located in different jurisdictions, this is not worth wasting your time on in the mediation. But as people who are, can always be named as defendants in civil lawsuits and accused of mediator malpractice, this is part of your risk management, is to be able to have said, well, I even warned the lawyer that there was some uncertainty about this.
And Mike's point is well taken. It's a good reason to join AAM and get the AAM insurance policy, which will protect lawyers from claims of malpractice arising out of service as a mediator. So that's just a minor plug. Okay, Joan or Beverly, want to add anything on pre-mediation protocols?
It sounds really silly what I'm going to say, but these are some of the things that people worry about. They worry about, what shall I wear? They worry about, am I going to be able to eat? They worry about, when can I go to the restroom? And rather than them have those questions that they might find embarrassing to ask you, I preempt them when I'm individually with them. And I also tell them if they need the restroom, obviously they can text me. I also told the speakers that I've always had a code word for people in mediation that I have with them, individuals, because I'm, when you're dealing with people who have a history together, they know how to push each other's buttons, and they could use a word. Let's just say honey, and honey to that other person is like calling them Satan. So I've often said to people, what are the trigger words that you have? And I'm going to give you a word that we're going to work out, that if you give me that, that's when I'm going to say, okay, we're going to take a break now. I need a break to grab a cup of tea. And so it takes it on me. So no one feels that they are weak because the perception is they needed a break. I'm always the one who will say, oh, really sorry, got to go to the restroom, that kind of thing. Or I need to stretch my legs. Build in those breaks. It's really important, and give them the heads up. I have a view about people dressing for Zoom. So I don't care what you wear sort of below, but I do want people to not turn up, lawyers or whatever, to turn up in a t-shirt and look like, in pajamas in their bed. I mean, I know that a lot of teachers had this problem with kids, but when I started, I was like, what are you wearing? To the lawyer, this is not happening. They've got to show a respect for the process, because you don't want your clients to think, well, this attorney doesn't give two hoots, or that, I have one client right now, he eats the whole time throughout the entire mediation. And there's already not an equilibrium in the room, because he's worth 2.3 billion and she doesn't even know what he's got. And he just constantly eats. And I have a divorce coach, and I said, what is with this person eating the whole time? What am I calling him out on it? What is going on? And then she's saying it's a nervous thing he has. It's like when people chew gum. He has this thing about eating. I said, how do I address this? How do I tell him, can he stop putting French fries in his mouth while he's talking to 13 people? And she said, I think that's a conversation that you and I have offline with him. And because the wife was seeing it as disrespect, that this is someone powerful, doesn't really care. And so you have to be very careful how you manage these things. But I think nip it in the bud, tell these people beforehand that you will build in those breaks, And if I don't get it right, don't worry, text me and we'll stop.
Do you think that fellow would have behaved the same way if it was in person?
Yeah, I think that I've had people with very, very strange habits, really strange, that you couldn't even fathom. From turning up in a duvet cover, like that's their blankie, to asking if they can put some photographs in the room of their children, and I've come back and all over the room have been crystals. I've been told to hold crystals. I've been told to hold crosses. There are various things that people do that, is quite odd. So yeah, I think odd behavior is just probably what I deal with on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And
But
mental
I think
health.
I think your point is a good one though, which is
yeah.
that by addressing what people wear, for instance, you're also in effect reminding the lawyers who do this all the time, unlike the clients. This is a mediation. This is just like it used to be. We're doing some things differently, but this isn't licensed to let's go try anything we feel like trying. We have a process here and we're going to follow this process and we're going to take it seriously.
And and part of the way you look is part of conveying that you are being serious. I think that's the point, and I think you're both right. I agree. I mean, look, it may be an old habit, but I always wear a jacket and tie when I'm mediating, and even the freebies. It's just, let's face it, the freebies that I did in Joliet, when I was in Joliet, I'd go to court in a jacket and a suit and tie. Well, I don't need the suit anymore because nobody knows what the pants look like, but I do wear the jacket and tie, and I do it. I mean, that's just routine. Now, my experience with the lawyers is they generally do too, and I'm not so sure about their clients, but I'm less concerned about them than I am about the lawyers, because the lawyers really are in control. They tell the clients what to do.
But I also don't want someone to be embarrassed. So,
Yes.
for example,
I see that.
someone
Yes.
might turn up wearing a sweatshirt, having just been for a run in the morning or whatever they needed to do to clear their head. And then there's a sense of embarrassment, or the other person thinks they're
Yes.
being disrespectful.
Yes.
So for all of us to say, I mean, dare I say, almost like this is the uniform above the waist. And, that's what we expect. I agree with Mike that it also, I came from a background where I was wearing a wig on my head, a gown, and speaking to jurors. There was a uniform, and there's a seriousness to that.
Yep.
There's a solemnity, a seriousness, and you can imagine the kind of work that I do was only the toxicity and the conflict was heightened so much during the pandemic.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so I needed to give them that safe space and that calm space. And these are the rules and the protocol. And it's one less thing for them to worry about.
So you expect you tell them, clients, you dress as if you were going to a formal proceeding, whether it's a mediation or a court or whatever it is. Okay.
Yes, I do.
Okay. It makes a lot of sense, actually. I mean, I learned something. That's great. Thank you. Okay. Anything else? I mean, I'd like to move on to what we do on mediation day, because I also want to leave room for
this shouldn't need to be said.
Go ahead, Mike.
This shouldn't need to be said, but I'll say it anyway. Both for yourself and for the people participating, but particularly for yourself, keep in mind kind of some of the basics of presentation, which is if you're sitting in a room and, in my room, if I had those blinds pulled and sun was streaming in, my face would be bathed in darkness and you wouldn't see it. Be sensitive to that and don't be the person who looks like they're sitting in the dark. Have light shining in your face. If you use an external camera, which I'm using, because I say my desktop didn't come with one, then if it's not built into the monitor itself, you have to be aware, right now I'm looking right at my screen and, I can see y'all. But right now, I'm making eye contact with you. And my camera is as close to the monitor as it could possibly be. So keep that in mind. And if you use virtual backgrounds, remember that you have this odd electronic effect that sometimes it looks like the wind's blowing and half of your shoulder is blown off to reveal the background that's behind you.
Can I also just mention, I mean, I agree with Mike, and there are various things that you can buy as well. You know, you've got the Zoom lights, they're not expensive. Obviously the day changes. So Mike's right, you go from sun, you know, into shade. The other thing is, don't forget, one of the classic tools we use as a mediator is mirroring language, body language. And you may feel, because you've only got sort of this upper part, that you can't mirror body language. Absolutely, it's absolutely not true. If I'm looking and talking to someone and they go like this, I'm often going like this. I'm looking straight at them. They might lean back. I might lean back. You forget, because it's not as typical. Sometimes people lean into the camera. You can lean into the camera. Mirroring body language has not gone. In fact, there is an intensity to it, because I can see people's faces really up close.
Yeah, and that's an important point to make too. You know, there are many people said, I don't want to use remote mediation because you can't see people. The fact is, you can see people better in a remote mediation if you know, and I hope everybody does, but up in the upper right-hand corner there, you have this view button, and when you hit it, if it's gallery view, you're looking at the Hollywood squares, but if it's speaker view, whoever is speaking is front and center. And if you want to get a look at someone, for instance, to see how they react to something being said, if you put your arrow, your cursor, into the box with 3 white dots in it, the blue box with 3 white dots, one of the options you will almost always get is pin. And that pin, like I just pinned Bob Berliner.
Uh-oh.
Bob Berliner is now occupying 80% of my screen, and I can see him way better than I would be able to see him if we were sitting 8 feet, 10 feet apart and wearing face masks. So don't sell short the ability to be able to get a very close look at people. And the beauty of it is they don't know you're doing it.
That's true. And the other thing is, there's a Zoom app that Jess, do you remember Brian Blitz had it?
Does
that
it
will automatically when you
capture
talk,
micro expressions?
No, it draws in. So when he's talking, the camera senses when it needs to move into the face. It's a very handy tool. I'm actually not going to, I put it out there, I'm not going to adopt it because I don't know, I want to be able to control how close I come rather than the computer, but it is something that's available.
That's different to the speaker view option. Okay.
If we're
Okay, I have
talking
a
about
question.
views-
I have a question, Mike. I just tried it. How do you unpin you?
When you have, so I just pinned you, Jonah.
Upper left.
In the
it
upper
should say
left-hand
remove pin.
corner of the picture, you have one
A remove pin.
one
I
of them
see.
says remove pin, and boom, it's gone.
If we're talking about the screens and studying people, just let me chime in with the one suggestion that I have that works for me, and that is using the feature called Hide Self View. If you need to be the host to do it, but in the upper right-hand corner, you can select that. What it does is it takes your face off your screen, but your face remains on everyone else's screen. I find my own face distracting, and I study people better when I get that off the picture. Then I can really be more present and focused on what they're doing. If you use that feature, every 15, 20, 30 minutes, you may have to click and put your picture back on to make sure you haven't moved off center and that you're still in the proper place and that lighting is still good. But it works for me, and that's my standard operating procedure.
So Jonah's not the only person I've come across who doesn't like to see their face on the screen.
I think maybe the concern is you like to see it too much.
As Jonah.
Spend too much, give it too much attention.
I have found it much, after all, if you were sitting in the same room in a live mediation, you wouldn't be able to see yourself. So I think I tried it at Jonah's suggestion, and frankly, I've become a believer. I mean, look, I don't do it all, for perpetually, but I think it's a big help at focusing on making you present with the people that you are engaged with. I really do believe
Bob,
that.
just on that point though, for me, dealing with the sort of high conflict, this has really helped me because someone's behavior, I'd have clients pulling up faces, when we were in person, or saying things, not knowing what their facial expression was. Now they can see it. Same with the lawyers, to be honest.
Oh, you're right.
Now they can see it. They are so much better at behaving. They pull a face, like go, ugh, and they suddenly catch themselves.
Yeah.
And it stops because you're looking in a mirror and everyone's looking at you. So the behavior of my clients has been so much better.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I'm sure that's right. I can't say I've really seen that, but in the commercial cases, it's not quite as, people aren't quite as demonstrative. Let's just say it that way. I think that's the case anyway. That's been by comparison, that's been my experience. Okay, so anything more? Let me ask a question. Does anybody have a question for us? I know we have our agenda says we're going to have questions and answers at the end, but since we're done pretty much talking about what we do before the mediation day, does anybody want to ask a question now? And feel free to unmute yourself if you have one. If not, we'll move on. Anybody? All right, 3, 2, 1, blast off. Okay, so we're going to move on and talk about mediation day. All right, who wants, Mike, you want to start this one?
Actually, I think when I'm looking at the outline of what we've talked about to this point, I would love to hear from Beverly about her views, which again, we had a pre-meeting on mental health.
Okay, all right, Beverly.
Because we're already in this world that is, different, strange, uncertain, and all the rest. We're already dealing with people who have, they're under the stress of the conflict that we're trying to help them with. What have you been seeing, and what can you do about it, Beverly?
Okay, so first of all, I think that the type of clients I have, they're quite entitled, and they sort of think that the world revolves around them because of their wealth.
My clients are the same way.
And that my concern with the pandemic wasn't just my clients, it was my lawyers, the lawyers that I work with on a day-to-day basis. And I said 3 words yesterday, which was I was always trying to put at the front of my mind compassion, tolerance, and patience. And, Jess and I work together, and I think she'll say, if there's one phrase I say to her on a daily basis, it's self-care. And what I was trying to do was, let's start with the lawyer's mental health and then how I worked with the clients beforehand. We were all going through a pandemic. We still are going through a pandemic, and there are going to be repercussions, the economic repercussions, social repercussions. And for many of my clients, they've had many mental health issues, not just for them, but watching their children. And I think that those are probably going to play out over quite a significant period of time. So what I did was I tried to remind my clients that lawyers were humans too, and that they were also going through a pandemic, and that we needed boundaries. Because what people have done, because you're in your home, something goes off in their head to say you're available 24/7. We can have a meeting at 9 o'clock, Bev. Don't worry about it. You're at home, I'm at home, great time to speak. And so you have to be comfortable with setting those boundaries. And I did it very much also for the lawyers. I said, we are not doing weekend ones. I will not do weekend ones. So they never had to go back to their client and go, oh, you know what? I just can't make it on a Saturday. Bev said she could do it, but I can't. So the mental health aspect, I brought a lot more mental health professionals into my process. I probably, and I'm very lucky because of the relationships I have with the mental health community, that I can get people to see the top therapists 24, 48 hours. I can get people in to see these experts, because the therapists have also been under huge pressure, as you can imagine. They are inundated with work. And so I look at the whole sort of ecosystem of people. It's not just my clients. Of course, divorce is an added, I always talk about layered trauma, is another trauma. But I also need to make sure that the scaffolding of the process, which in my case is attorney, I only do attorney assisted, that whole scaffolding is holding up. And right from the start, I had said to Jess, I really need to touch base with these lawyers. I mean, I was calling or texting lawyers to see how they were doing. I would start, when I start my mediation, always just talking to the lawyers, just checking in on them personally, just leaning in that little bit more, just showing that compassion. If their dog starts barking, go, oh gosh, I know. What kind of dog have you got? Exactly what Mike said. It's funny, Jess, he just gave the example that I did yesterday with that picture behind that guy's head. So that was a really good example. And Jess and I talked about it afterwards, the building of the rapport of things that are not controversial, but mental health. And what I've done is build in to the process many more check-ins on mental health, maybe asking questions that I otherwise would not have asked. And just even asking the question, they feel you care. And, the last thing I need is for, one of these kids, I mean, the psych ward at Lurie's since COVID has been absolutely, every bed has been taken. They are shipping them out to the suburbs. I have children who are self-harming in my cases. We need to move really quickly. And my clients don't always put their best foot forward, but I think building the rapport in the pre-meetings and leaning in on what otherwise you wouldn't do. And my divorce coaches, I'm having nearly every single mediation with them present in probably 40% of my cases. I have mental health. I'm fortunate because my clients have the money to have these experts, but having them in the room to be able to do a breakout, having done a lot of the pre-work with them, has been really important. But I would say to you as a group, mediation per se is a very challenging, rewarding, but a very challenging job to do. It also can be very lonely because we've often come from places where we've been part of a firm, and suddenly you're on your own. I would, and I'm plugging now for Bob, but organizations like this are important to keep in touch with, because you've got to make sure that you don't feel alone. And I say this to, as mediators, and I said this to the pre-group yesterday, we're selling a product of ADR. We are selling a product of trying to avoid conflict and coming up with solutions that work for both parties. I've always said you have to walk the walk on that, not just talk the talk. And I think the pandemic was a time, and still is a time, when you should lean in and just stay connected with other people in our field. It is really important. Because this can, if you're doing 3 or 4 a day and you're keeping them short, but you're doing that number, or even 1 a day or 2 a day, you are going to be exhausted. You're going to be exhausted. And checking in with other people and staying close to friends and things like that, I would say is very important. So self-care and check in with other, don't always just assume it's your clients. Keep an eye on those lawyers.
Bob, Jonah had some terrific stuff that I want to make sure we don't miss here on connecting, even though you're not face to face with someone. And it actually, as I was thinking about it just before we started this evening, it occurred to me a lot of people these days meet online who end up getting married. So it's possible for people to form relationships online and to develop intimacy online and to develop a meaningful sense of trust online before they ever are face to face. And so, what I'm hoping Jonah can speak to now, he can give us. He's got some great ideas that I just thought were really, really helpful.
Just for the audience, these are not marriage brokerage ideas. These are mediation ideas.
Right.
Jonah, you got the floor.
Sure. Before I get into a couple of those things that have worked for me, I think, in some of these mediations, I did want to I agree with Beverly very much on mediators keeping in touch. And those of you who know me know I do a lot of volunteer mediations for the Center for Conflict Resolution. And we have been having once a month something called a reflective practice group at noon. And it's basically just mediators getting together and talking, telling some stories, saying, this happened to me, man, I got in trouble here. You know, what do people suggest? And I think it's open to people who are not part of the Center for Conflict Resolution. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested, it's a Zoom call where mediators just air it out a little bit. Just contact me, Jonah Orlovsky, get a hold of me, and I'll be happy to put you in touch with the people to get you on the mailing list for that. Yeah, okay, I can run down I tried to sit there on pen and paper. I know a lot of people say, how do you develop that same sort of rapport? What I tell people a lot of times is if you can get past the technical hurdles, the rapport part is kind of easy. The technical hurdles are really would create far more problems than the inability to develop rapport. But the things I talk about is one thing Mike mentioned earlier is don't forget small talk. It does seem to be a little more, it does seem to be something that gets forgotten about because the moment you're on Zoom, it's like it's intense. And, we got to go and start talking about the issues, ask people about the background. I remember one time a fellow, when he would go off camera for a break, there was a little decal on his screen, and that was a case involving a father fighting with the grandparents about who was going to raise a child, a custody battle. And I finally asked him, what's that thing that comes on your screen? And it turns out he's a very big member of a father's rights group. And he at the end of it, I said, thank you for asking about that. Just, picked up on something in there that had nothing to do, it turned out to have to do with the mediation, but I didn't know it that when I went in. So look for things in the room, find out what room they're in the house, what's going on in their house, not from security points of view, just from finding out about two people talking. But don't forget that stuff. We've talked about hiding self-view. One thing that I've begun to learn is it's true that your facial expressions, you probably are a little better behavior, but I think it's good when be aware of your body language and sometimes to exaggerate it. For example, if you want someone to know you're agreeing or you're attentive, a bigger nod is required than you'd need in the room for them to know. If you want that nod effect to come across, do it a little bit bigger. I wasn't a theater major. I don't know too much about this, but I think that little bit works a little bit. Something that mixes up is something I just did before, using your hands. As they say, if the parties are this far apart, now you're this far apart, maybe we can get to here. Just throws a little something different in it because we're just looking at faces all the time. Face, 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 face. So if you can throw a little hand gesture, you have to bring your hands up to get them in the screen, but it's very easy to do. I think it mixes things up a little bit. And all these things, I think, can develop rapport. We've talked a lot about catching the party's emotions through studying their faces. And I did want to mention, it's not only the party that's talking that you're looking for, it's the party that's listening. Now that's me. I do a lot of mediations that have a lot of joint sessions where the parties are both on the Zoom session talking to each other. These are parenting agreements and things like that. Parties are often pro se. But I've done some others too, where it's like an internal organizational dispute and you've got the people in the organization. So you've got all the people in there, and sometimes how a person is taking in what the other person is saying can be almost more important than the facial expression of the person talking. If a dad is saying that I want 2 more days a week with my kid, that's because the mom, whenever the kid's there, the mom throws him with a babysitter. So why does she even care? I want to see how that's playing with the mom. Is she just sort of taking it in calmly, or is she, agitated? And so you can read both parties' emotions. As been mentioned before, that's actually an advantage, I think, on Zoom, the ability to study what people are doing. But it can be all the different parties. Another thing, this may not apply again to people who don't do a lot of joint session work, but if you are doing any sort of joint session work, when we're in a room with people, we like to get people talking to each other, not to the mediator. If you've had that, you've had the experience where people refuse to look at the other person because there's such hostility and they talk directly to you, the mediator, but you try to say, when you're in a room physically, you point and say, tell that person, tell the mom, tell the dad, tell your business partner, don't tell me. How do you do that in Zoom? Can't really do it as much, but the only thing I've come up with is using the names. Like if someone makes a statement and you think the other person wants to respond, you'd say, Bob, tell Mary what your response to that is, rather than Bob, what is your response? And I think just mentioning the names, tell Mary, and then Bob, tell Mary what you thought, going back and forth with the names might help a little bit in getting the people to feel there's more of a direct dialogue going back and forth rather than through the mediator. These are just things I try. Maybe, I don't know how they work, but they seem to work for me. This maybe gets a little down the road, but also when you get to agreement writing, which is something that works very well on Zoom. I know, Mike, you say that you don't write agreements, but I do write agreements for the parties. I write term sheets. I don't obviously write up the formal agreement, but something that works for me. But when you put the agreement up on the share screen feature, everybody is watching you write that agreement. And when you're typing, they're watching every typo you make. And that's a good source for humor. It's a good way to loosen things up if there's a little bit of tension in the room at that time. They can just see you go backspace on the words, backspace on the words. And it is a little nerve-wracking because everybody's watching you type. I'm not the greatest typist to begin with. So that's another element to another occasion when you can bring sort of the human element into things. And when people correct you or they see you've spelled a name wrong, you can say, thanks, great. I'm glad I have some proofreaders looking over my shoulder.
You ever intentionally make a mistake?
I make enough of them when I'm typing that I have no need to do that.
Okay. Good for you.
Speaking of making mistakes, by the way, something you should do in the room and something you should do, regardless of all the meetings, make sure you say people's names correctly. Don't ever screw that up as a mediator. That would be like chalk on a board or something like that if you had the names wrong. The last thing I had in this little set of tips here was I frequently mention things about Zoom. The example I use in the paper there was like, if you see someone kind of getting a little agitated, you say, even though we're on Zoom, I think I can see you getting really mad. And you can also mention things about it, when they're going to breakout rooms, like, we would be going to rooms here, but we got Zoom, we got to make the best of it. So I'm going to put you in this virtual room. I make a lot of jokes about using Zoom because I think it, again, develops rapport and sort of eases some of the concerns and nervousness about what's going on. So these are all rapport building things. So you can use Zoom as a vehicle for developing rapport where you used to be able to use the handshake, the physical presence of being together. So those are my tips.
Really helpful. Very nice, Jonah.
I'll do that, Jonah. Very, very good. Can I just mention something that Jonah said that I swear to God, I'm not boosting Amazon here. So I wear blue glasses, okay? I noticed 5 of you on the screen have glasses. That is a prop that you can use when you are talking. And when Jonah gave a really good example about the hands. When you've got glasses, you could go, like you're listening, you can use this. You're going like this. They are really helpful as a prop. So even if you don't wear glasses, I wear these because I'm on Zoom for 10, 11 hours a day. So I use the blue glasses. Of course, you can get a screen to go over your computer or your laptop, which will make it easier for you on your eyes. The other thing that I don't want to forget, and we learned this, I start my mediations usually 3 minutes past the hour, because if you start a Zoom on the hour, particularly at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, everyone else is using it then. And you are likely to have technical issues the first few minutes. I tell people this. It says 9 o'clock, but we're going to click on a few minutes afterwards because people get destabilized when there is a technical issue. They don't want their first impressions first time in a mediation that they don't know what they're doing. So we try and mitigate as best we can. The other thing is, because Jess is in all the mediations, they have direct access to her, and they will call her if she has a technical issue. So she will be talking, she will mute herself out. She will be talking them through on the technical issue. Another thing that Jonah said, and I really agree with this, I did this in person and I do it on Zoom. there are times, even in the most hostile of divorces, where you just have to be very fearless and you have to be okay about having people together. And so what I do is I leave the lawyers in a room and I just take the two parties and I ask them to speak directly to each other, because I agree with Jonah. The power of that, especially when they have such a history together, should never be underestimated. But everything Jonah says, I agree 100% with. I'm making notes on all this as well. I'm stealing ideas.
I have one last thought, Bob.
Okay.
And it's really based on something that Beverly brought up earlier. And I've been thinking about this since she brought it up yesterday again. And she's a pioneer. She's way out ahead of everybody else doing this. I have always conceived of mediation as being basically an all-day affair. If certain circumstances, people want to do it in a half day, that's fine. And if you are accommodating people, or you're using this tool to accommodate people's schedules so phenomenally well that it's no harder to schedule a mediation than it is to schedule a conference call. Is it worth stopping and thinking about whether there's a model or models of mediation that are not built around we're going to spend all day together, we're going to get the momentum, people are going to, have their thinking, confront the other side's thinking, and we're going to get to the point where we get to a resolution. Instead of a one day or however long, one-time affair, is it something where it makes sense in a given case to plan it from the beginning, to break it into 2 or 3 sessions of a couple hours apiece?
So Mike,
No one has ever even floated that idea to me that I'm aware of in the ADR world before. Maybe I'm ignorant, but it seems to me we have the perfect tool for doing that. And why should we not be thinking outside the box, if you pardon the expression, and seeing if that isn't a way that we can make mediation more effective by doing it virtually?
Beverly, why don't you, Lorna has something to add, but Beverly, why don't you, I know you have something to add to Mike, and then I'll open the floor to Lorna.
So I agree. I mean, my view, it's very sweet to say I'm a pioneer. What I think I do is I try to react to a situation when it occurs. And I think that we can do really, and be creative as we like, hybrids. I am not doing, because my clients are not, it's not that they're not capable. I don't want to suggest my clients are capable of doing, I mean, I've done, maybe 1 16-hour Zoom, but those tend to be when it's my signing days, when we've done all the mediation and we're just going back and forth on the red line. But my mediation model now is very much, Mike, about what I call case management. Let's say it's almost like a pre-trial. So I have case management conference, and I'm not saying I get it right every time, because someone seems completely normal and they turn out to be completely cuckoo during the mediation.
Yes.
But the case
that happens
all the time with me,
all
the time.
What a revelation.
And I think I've got it right. And then suddenly they start talking in a different voice. But so case management meetings is so important, because I have people who are able.
Who participates in that, Beverly? Who participates in the case management?
Okay, so I'm quite good at picking up when I'm on a Zoom thing with people who may have some form of ADHD. That you will also notice some people who are they're moving around a lot, they're challenged in sitting down. I've also encouraged people, if they do have challenge sitting down, to buy one of those desks. A couple of my lawyer friends took my advice, bought the desks and stand up. It's like a different lawyer. But I agree with Mike. I will tell you that no case anymore for me this is the model. It has given me such freedom to individualize the needs of the clients and the needs of all the professionals, And that to me is great. If I'm able to work things all around, maybe the lawyer has to go and do a prove up, or you know, one has to get their kids, I don't know, to the babysitter, whatever it may be. Case management meetings, I start, Bob, with the meeting the clients first and sort of drawing on some of that. Then I meet with the lawyers separately and I tell them, this is what I'm picking up on. This is what my concern is.
When you say you meet with the clients, you meet with them both, they're divorces, so they're two clients. You meet with them together or each one separately?
Very good question. Pre-COVID, it was together most of the time.
Yep.
During COVID and on Zoom, always separately.
Yep. Okay. That's what I would have thought. Okay, keep going. And what about the lawyers? What about the lawyers?
I think
the lawyers together or separately?
Depending on who my lawyers are.
Okay.
So I, as you know, I'm very lucky. I have a good body of lawyers that I work with regularly, but there are some who are a little bit more tricky than others.
No.
And so again, that's a case management navigation part that I do on an ad hoc basis.
Okay.
And so I think Mike is right. I've probably done maybe 160, Jess, do you think maybe now 117 on Zoom mediations? And I would say that I don't think I have any rules in terms, I mean, I've got protocols and everything else, but I am able to now have a flexibility that I wasn't able to have before, and it's serving my clients. We haven't had one mediation that hasn't been successful.
It doesn't surprise me. Lorna, what did you want to add to that? I want to say something too, but Lorna, you go ahead.
And she's on mute.
I know she's on. She can unmute herself, I think.
Yep, there we go. Thanks. No, I agree on the individualization. I had a situation, so I do employment mediations, and I had a situation, I think it was just last week, where I started earlier than usual, but I had turned myself into a pretzel on a day for the people, and I had a commitment from 12 to 1 that I really wanted to honor, right? And so I thought to myself, okay, it came to me that morning. I said, you know what, if we're not done by noon, it was just going to be an hour. And I'm like, we're going to take a lunch break or whatever. And so I talked to them and I said, you know what, my hope is we'll be done. We started at 9. It wasn't unreasonable to think that it could be done. I think it was 1 o'clock, that we could be done by 1. And I said, if we're not, for some reason, we're going to take a formal lunch break and then we can come back and finish it. Well, by gosh, 12:55, that thing was done, perfectly settled and drawn up, right? And they all wanted to get it done and moving it. And I'd never tried that before, but I sometimes joke saying, you know, I think I should start all my mediations at 4 in the afternoon and see if they can all get done by 5, right? Because sometimes they grow to the size. So it was an individualized situation. I had had a lot of touch points with the parties beforehand, so I think I was able to really move it. But I also think Beverly's exactly right, that you can, and they had raised concerns about not wanting to waste their time and all of that. So it's not for everyone, but if you pick up on what the parties' needs are, and it just so happened to coincide with my own needs, it can work.
Well, now Beverly's cases tend to have a lot of different issues. You know, there's parenting, there's money, there's support, there's all those kinds of things. The cases I do tend not to have that many different issues. Usually, of course, it's about money. That's the bottom line, but they're usually tangential issues, but that are nowhere near as important to anybody. But my experience, I come from the deal world. You know, I was not a litigator in my prior life. I was much more of that, although I did litigate in my misguided early years, as Mike Leach well knows. I tended to be a deals guy. So we did, especially real estate deals. And one of the things that I learned about real estate deals is it takes an iron butt and alertness, but it's amazing how reasonable the other side gets at 10 or 11 or midnight after you've been at it all day. And my experience is not all that dissimilar in mediation. If you keep them at the table and you keep making progress and you tell them that they're making progress, which you always were in the deal world, I'm amazed at how reasonable people get at the end of that time, and how they're receptive to making a deal they tend to be. Now, again, I come at it from a deal world, so that's my experience. But I have not seen anything different in the online from the in person in that regard. Sure, it's easier for people to get, to go away for an hour while you're meeting with the other side. They're at home, they can go to grab something to eat. There are all kinds of things they can do, which makes it easier, and may, I suppose, theoretically should make them less flexible, but I haven't seen that. Not at all. I've been very, very, as I said at the outset, very pleasantly surprised at how effective Zoom has been compared to my bias in favor of in person. And I think from what I've heard from my co-panelists, everybody seems to agree with that. That although maybe some of them aren't surprised, as I was, Beverly doesn't sound like she was surprised.
No, I was. No. Please, Bob, don't think it. I literally, when the pandemic happened, I thought, okay, I might no longer have a job. Please don't think that I had any sense that this was going to work. I said to Jess, oh my gosh, I think we might not have a job in 2 weeks. But I pivoted, but I didn't have a crystal ball. I didn't know that it was going to, but I do think that the fine tuning, and as things come up over the next 3, 4, 5 years, we have the ability to fine tune our processes and be afraid to do it. But no, I trust me, Bob. I thought I'm gonna have to look for another job.
Well, the only thing that I have seen is different. I do the pro bono mediation along with others in Will County in Joliet. And I have not seen that the mediation that actually takes place is any less effective. I don't think I've had a case in Joliet that hasn't settled. But there are fewer of them, because when you're sitting there in the courtroom with your jacket, with your suit on, of course, with your tie, and the judge says, "Hey, I get this media over here. You want to go settle this case?" It's pretty tough for somebody to say no. But when they're on Zoom and they got to, call me or send me an email and blah, 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 it just doesn't happen as often. But I have not found it any less effective. But that's kind of a little bit beside the point. All right. So one of the things that I wanted to ask, do you see any difference in the way it works when the lawyer and the client, normally in a mediation, in caucus or in joint session, the lawyer and and his or her client are in the same place? Do you see any difference when they're not from what we are used to, or have we become so used to it doesn't matter anymore?
No, I think it's a trade-off, actually. The advantage when the lawyer and the client aren't together is if you're in one of those situations where you really have been brought in to help manage the expectations and the relationship and the process, because the lawyer has a problem with this client, it's much easier to have offline communications with the attorney than if the attorney is sitting right there with the client. Then it's obvious the client knows that you're speaking separately. That doesn't necessarily lead to distrust or anything, but it's just easier, more convenient. But I think particularly with attorneys representing individuals, but certainly not exclusively this way, that the intimacy and the dynamics of the relationship between attorney and client are such that has a lot to do with a lot of cases that resolve in mediation finally getting there. When someone is up against it and they have to make a hard decision, obviously the person they're going to turn to is their attorney. And I think the attorney is going to be more, not just effective, but
More
not getting the right word.
More persuasive?
No. is going to be of better service to the client if the attorney and the client are in the same place. I've seen that play out. That you just you can feel the intimacy of that relationship, the trust that's in that relationship, helping to make things happen that might not otherwise have happened. And I worry a little bit when the attorney is in a different location, whether that intimacy, whether that closeness is as effective. So I that it's a trade-off, obviously, and it depends. It's case specific. There's a lot of cases the client is just, get me out of here. I want to make as good a deal as I can. I want this to be over. And the lawyer's job really is to be the most effective negotiator and not leave anything on the table. In that situation, less of a concern. But I think that's something that attorneys should be thinking hard about. Do I want to be physically, especially now when it's way more feasible than it was 6 months, 8 months ago, do I want to be physically there with my client, or is it just as easy to, I'll do it from my home, they can do it from their home?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I'm about to do my first in-person mediation since February or March of last year, and I'm curious as to how it will differ. All right, Joni, do you want to add anything in that regard?
No, not on this subject.
Beverly?
I would just say, and I think Jill has a question, but I would just say, I have found, and this is just personal to me, that the lawyers have lent very heavily on me during Zoom in terms of the management of clients. I think I've had to lean in more, and I've always been a facilitative mediator, and I think it's fair to say I've had to become a little bit more evaluative, because the lawyers have looked to me and been pretty upfront saying, I need help here.
Yeah.
And I'm, and so that's only been my personal experience. And because I've had such long relationships with most of these lawyers, I think they feel comfortable doing that. But the management of the clients, I think, and that's why I'm always saying to mediators, stay in touch with other mediators. I think we might be carrying, or maybe it's just me, I feel like I'm carrying a little bit more of a burden than I was before.
Jill, do you have a question? You got your hand up, I see. Your virtual hand, not your real hand, but your virtual hand.
Yes, I'm sorry, it blends in with my background, so thank you for noticing. But yeah, I agree with, this is so helpful. Thank you all for doing this. And I had a quick thought, but then a related question. My thought was just that I've found, I think similar to what Mike was saying, that I feel, and I think, what Beverly was saying too, I'm having to work a little harder, because when the lawyer and client, especially, I do mostly employment work, and especially the plaintiff side, when they're not together, I think sometimes they kind of sign off when I'm not with them. You kind of miss that time that they have together. So I find myself trying to give more homework assignments and asking them specifically things to work on during that time. But the question I had for the group or the panel is, as we're, knock on wood, kind of starting to come out of this, I'm actually in the middle of this. I haven't decided how I'm going to respond yet, but a mediation that came up, I have the defense side has 4 different 3 corporate and then 2 defendants. They want to do all virtual. Several are out of state, but the plaintiff wants to meet in person. And I'm wondering if there, I would encourage the plaintiff and the counsel to be together, but I'm just wondering, has anyone done this or had any thoughts on, my inclination is that I should probably be on Zoom if one whole side is on Zoom, but I'm just curious if anyone said, I think, you could be with one side and then Zoom in the other side, or how people have, because I'm a little concerned about neutrality and just the perception of it just doesn't feel quite right. But
Beverly's nodding, and I think you got that one absolutely right. Beverly, go ahead.
Yeah, you know why I was nodding. Neutrality is everything, as you know. And I've had people lose their mind over the color pen I use for one person than the other. So when we say that people aren't picking up on things, I was accused of being biased because I chose a green for one person. So
The color of money.
So I like the color. So going back, I wanted to mention one other thing, Bob, that might help everyone. I have started doing a lot more agendas for my cases because we're able to focus. It helps more with the pre-mediations. It keeps us on track. And if we are doing more days and shorter sessions, it makes sure that it keeps us all together and the clients see that there is a formality and a structure to the process.
And progress.
Progress. In terms of Zoom, I will tell you, we've redone our website and we have two pages about Zoom on it. I'm going to, I've had both vaccines. I'm actually going to base a lot of my decisions on the person who has the lowest level of comfort being present in the room. There are, what I've discovered is there are very personal issues as to why someone might not want to be in person that they may never want to disclose to me. I've had 2 clients who, unfortunately, as a result of the pandemic, have gone completely agoraphobic. They have not left their house since March of last year. 2. Curtains shut, don't leave the house, have food delivered. One won't even walk to the end of their driveway to get their mail. It has to be brought and left on the mat at the front. And so I think that if we go back, I'm always going to base my decision on, I want to decide, is everyone going to be Zoom? And I certainly would never agree to be in person with one side and not the other. I would never do it. People, there is no way, no matter how great, Jill, you are and how neutral you are, that someone, if they don't like the way that you've done something or the outcome, that they couldn't try and rely on that to say, well, what did you say? Did you say that? I mean, I have clients who say to their spouses things that I have never said in my life. But in an argument, they said, Beverly said that I was right all along and I should have divorced you 20 years ago. They make things up. And so to avoid that being said with you being in an individual session in person, I would never do that, personally.
Then the mediation.
So the one caveat
I agree. Let me just say one thing.
The one caveat I would add.
The mediation I'm about to do in person, I insisted on 2 things. First, that everybody agreed to do it in person. And second, no masks. I said, if somebody's got a mask on, I'd rather have it on Zoom because at least I can see their face. That's really easy. And everybody, look, it's 2, 3 clients, 2 on one side, 1 on the other, and 2 lawyers. So it's not a huge group. But I absolutely insisted 2 things. 1, everybody's got to want to do it in person, and 2, no masks. And so far, everybody's agreed to it. But I will say, it's almost as if I feel like I'm almost as if I'm sailing in uncharted waters. A year ago, you said, "Oh, you're going to do a mediation in person?" Hey, of course, we all do them, and we do them all in person. Now you say, "I'm doing it in person." What? What's going on here? This is a new world.
Can I add something here? I did a mix and match mediation along the lines that Jill is suggesting. And what we did was arrange to have all parties in a law office, but I actually never went into the room of one of the parties. The other party wanted to do it in person, and it worked out terrifically. But we just had to, it was just a management question to resolve the questions or the issues that Beverly and others have identified. So
the one thing I would say to Jill is that if the one circumstance where that might make sense is if it's already out on the table on both sides that the difficulty in this mediation is we have a client control problem. That's how lawyers describe it. Client control. Isn't that terrible? Who's in charge here anyway? Client control? Jeez. Well, that's what they say.
That sounds like typical.
If it's characterized as a client control problem and both sides are aware of that, you might be in a situation where both the defense and the claimant side really want you to be able to be face to face with that claimant. And nothing else is really terribly important because they're counting on you to bring them to, into a land of reason and good sense. So that's otherwise, I agree with what everybody said, and I am. See, this Zoom thing and all the different hybrid possibilities opens up all these new questions, doesn't it?
If just talking about hybrids, by the way, a mediation I did actually a few years ago before COVID, it involved a dispute within an organization. It was an arts organization and there were different factions, and this was getting everybody around a table to sit and talk, but half the people were all around the country. And the way I did that hybrid was I had to get a separate camera for, like you have for my laptop, and a separate microphone. So I had people around a circular table. The microphone went in the middle. The camera was off to the side so they could see me and everybody around the table. So the people on Zoom were almost feeling like they could see the room that they were talking in. The only shortcoming was the people in the room couldn't really see the people around the country because that was on one screen. But it worked pretty well. This was a very different kind of mediation. It wasn't a court case or a dispute. It was a group of people within this arts organization who had to work some things out. But it was a hybrid. You had to have the camera placed right so the people from around the country wouldn't just see my face. Just a model there that you could use.
We got about 3 minutes. Does anybody have a question?
Lorna had a question.
Who did?
Lorna had a
Lorna, did you
question.
have a question? And anybody
It wasn't
else?
a question, it was just a comment. And you guys, which is, I've done these things every which way you can possibly imagine, Jill, and I agree with what a lot of people have said, but I often think these are topics that you can mediate, right? Like mediate the pre-mediation. It all comes down to what Beverly said earlier on, which is the individualization. Why does that person want you in person, right? And if the other side doesn't care or thinks it would be like, get to the underneath why. And if they're all comfortable with it, it will work. This one that I was telling you about where the parties wanted it done fast, 2 of them were on the phone. They weren't even on camera, and the rest of them were on Zoom. The other side was fine with that. And that was a lawyer and a client who wouldn't go on Zoom. So, I'm like, okay, it worked, it got done.
Any other questions?
No, I do want to say the few things that I use that are really helpful in Zoom.
Oh yes, no commission.
So it's not just the blue glasses. So I'm sitting for a long period of time, okay? And I have tried every which way, the back supports, the different chairs. Someone got me this and it is amazing. It's called Extreme. I feel like I'm on, what's that selling channel in America? It's called Extreme Comforts. And you put your coccyx in here because I was getting back pain. This is like $20 from Amazon. It has been a game changer for me. And someone sent me this. I'm like QVC. Someone sent me this, and I swear to God, it can't be more than $10. I am getting neck pains. Am I the only person who's getting all these issues? So I am getting.
You're just working
hard. Jess, I know you.
Beverly.
So it has got. I've been using this every day. Okay, when I have a breakout, I use this, and I haven't had any pains.
What's it called? What's it called, Beverly?
God, Jess, what is this called? What's this one called?
That one was a gift from an attorney. I'll have to look it up.
But we'll send it to you.
I'll send you the link that they sent it to us. We were paying it forward to another attorney.
I tell you, the gifts that we now pay forward to people is the craziest thing. It used to be really nice, and now it's things like this. But those are just some helpful things. Also, I know I sound like a mom here, but hydration. You're talking, You've got to have loads of water here. And I think also I'm going to pick up on something that Jonah said. In the way that you have to exaggerate your body language, you also have to exaggerate your verbiage. And so the two together, it's a harder job. You're exaggerating certain things that you're doing. And if you're doing that, your voice is going to need more hydration.
All right. Anything more? We're really out of time. And I want to thank everybody for being here and participating, and the enthusiasm was just terrific. If somebody has one last question, otherwise I'm going to adjourn.
I don't have a question, Bob, but earlier you said that a mediator needs an iron butt. I totally agree, but in my word, we call it a good tuchus.
Oh, well, my former senior partner, Jay Aarons, called it an iron butt. And there was one other thing you had to have too. Oh, an iron bladder. That was the other thing.
Well, Judge Shader, when I clerked for Judge Shader, he called it a good tuchus.
All right.
Well, I told you, Bob, the language that we always used to use in court in the UK. As a barrister, if you wanted to go to the restroom, you said, Your Honor, I'd be grateful to have a comfort break. So now I joke with everyone, my clients, but I say, if you need a comfort break, because that can now encompass everything, water, tea, the loo, it doesn't matter. But Bob, thank you for getting this
thank
together.
you all. I mean, come on, you Beverly, Mike, Jonah, you guys made the show. It was just terrific. I was proud to be, and honored to be a part of it. And I think it was just a fabulous discussion. And you guys can, look, anybody who wants to ask any more questions, give us a call, send us an email. We're all glad to respond. You know, that's what we're here for.
Do reach out if you do.
We're always anxious to stay in touch with other mediators.
Yeah, please do that. I mean, I know people say that all the time and you think, oh yeah, they don't really mean it. I mean, I can only speak from person. I really do. If someone has a question,
I can testify for Beverly. She does mean it. Mike means it. Jonah means it. And yes, nobody will testify that I mean it, but I really do.
Bob, can I add two quick comments? One, for AAM members, we have CLE credit. And two, I don't think you announced this at the beginning. It was recorded and it will be available to
ACR members.
ACR members.
Yes, I will forward it to Christina and she will put it up on the ACR website. All right, I think I've recorded it. Mark, if I screwed it up, I'm sorry. All right, thank you, everybody. And
thanks, Bob.
I'm going to end it right now. Good night.
Thank you
very much.